Hello, my name is Megan Forney, but I go by Naomi. My presentation is on my research study, Are Expressions of Neurodivergency Predictive of Experiences of Social Isolation and Loneliness? If you break down the term neurodivergent, neuro is a prefix that refers to the nervous system, while divergent suggests something is differing from what is considered normal. When those two words are put together, neurodivergent describes individuals whose brains differ from societal norms. In comparison, the term neurotypical describes individuals whose cognitive functions do not differ from what is considered normal. Neurodivergent individuals may be diagnosed with one or more neurodevelopmental disorders. The DSM-5 categorizes those disorders as learning disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, communication disorders like developmental language disorder, intellectual impairments, and motor disorders. Some background information on neurodiversity. In 2022, the Center for Disease Control released the first data on adults living with autism in the United States. They estimated around 5.5 million adults in the United States have autism spectrum disorder. In comparison, a study on the prevalence of adult attention hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, in 2020 estimated a 2.6 prevalence of persistent adult ADHD and 6.8 prevalence of symptomatic adult ADHD. This is around roughly 140 million and 370 million adults around the world. The diagnostic criteria for autism requires deficits in social communication, but also a manifestation of restricted repetitive behaviors. Those restricted repetitive behaviors are also similar to behaviors that you see in individuals with ADHD. Examples of social communication deficits include does not initiate or respond to social interactions, abrupt verbal and nonverbal communication, poor eye contact and body language, difficulty using body gestures, a lack of facial expressions while communicating, and difficulties in matching behavior appropriately to social contexts. Examples of restricted repetitive behaviors include repetitive movements and use of objects, which is lining things up, putting things in order repeatedly, repetitive language, resistance to change in routines, causing severe distress when routines are changed. This also includes transitioning, abnormal focus or attachment to fixated interests, and abnormal sensory reactions such as indifference to pain or significant negative response to sounds and textures. In East Asian countries, particularly Japan, there is a concept of hikikomori, which is severe pathological social isolation or withdrawal. A case study on the comorbidity between hikikomori and autism spectrum disorder found that individuals suffering from it are more likely to show symptoms of autism, as well as display deficits in socialization. The hikikomori cases that exhibited symptoms of autism were more likely to be at risk of depression and low social support. This is indicating that there is social isolation and loneliness associated with neurodivergency. There is also a study of young adults with autism. They questioned young adults with autism, intellectual disabilities, emotional behavior disabilities, and learning disabilities. And they asked questions regarding their socialization within the past year. Participants indicated that young adults with autism were more likely to experience less socialization. This includes social isolation and higher reports of never seeing friends, never getting called by friends, and never getting invited to activities. There was a study in the UK that sought to analyze the social experiences of autistic university students. They interviewed students on topics such as their ASD diagnosis, experiences in school, the extent of support they received from their universities, their mental health, the disclosure of their diagnosis with staff and peers, and views on the awareness of ASD students. The results identified that most students were dissatisfied with their social life, ranging in a scale from mild to severe satisfaction or dissatisfaction. They also struggle with companionship, reporting having few friends, and some expressed struggling to make any friends at all. Most also reported social difficulties and difficulties communicating were significant barriers for them. However, there is a study using the Cyberball. It's a game where they play a ball game online with two pre-programmed players. The participants are not made aware that their opponents are not actual people. The study wanted to examine the effects of experimentally induced ostracism on participants' self-reported anxiety, mood, and feelings of threatened social needs, which include self-esteem, belonging, control, and meaningful existence. During the Cyberball, pre-programmed players will stop throwing the ball to participants after a few turns, which creates a feeling of rejection and ostracism. Results indicated that both groups responded similarly. Adolescents with autism were able to recognize they were being ostracized, which is not something that is typically predicted. Adolescents with autism and neurotypical adolescents both indicated significant threats to their needs. The group of autistic adolescents reported a higher threat in meaningful existence. Researchers identified that a possible lack of support network in comparison to their neurotypical peers may have contributed to the higher result. My purpose of my study was to investigate whether Neurodivergent behaviors can be predictive of feelings of isolation. I also intend to examine the relationship between social isolation and different ways of expressing neurodivergent behaviors. So this includes masked or camouflage behaviors. This is when you mask your neurodivergent behaviors to seem to present yourself as neurotypical, and restricted and repetitive behaviors to determine if one type is more predictive of social isolation compared to the other. My null hypothesis was that expressions of neurodivergency have no association with the experience of social isolation and loneliness. My hypothesis is that I predict that responses of high levels of expressions of neurodivergency will report significant association with experiences of social isolation and loneliness. My second hypothesis was that I predict that responses of high levels of repetitive behaviors will report a more significant association with experiences of social isolation and loneliness when compared to camouflaging or masking behaviors. I used 3 questionnaires. I used the CAT-Q, which is a 25-item self-report questionnaire. It measures social camouflaging neurodivergent behaviors. It was on a Likert type scale. Some examples are when I'm interacting with someone, I deliberately copy their body language or facial expressions. And in social situations, I feel like I'm performing rather than being myself. The RBQ2A asks participants to self-report frequency in which they perform 20 repetitive behaviors. Restricted repetitive behaviors are part of the diagnostic criteria for autism, but commonly manifest in other disorders. Examples include, do you rock backwards and forwards or side to side when sitting or standing? And do you insist on doing things in a certain way or redoing things until they are just right? I also use the UCLA Loneliness Scale, version 3, to measure social isolation and loneliness. It measures a participant's self-reported feelings of loneliness and social isolation, and it was a revised version of the original scale that rewords the original items into question format for easier comprehension. Examples include, how often do you feel you lack companionship? How often do you feel that your interests and ideas are not shared by those around you? And how often do you feel left out? I have received 30 responses thus far. It's a small sample size, and this shows the results. Multiple regression analysis was conducted to test expressions of neurodivergency behaviors as predictors of experiences of social isolation and loneliness. The overall model was significant, but the coefficient data for the CAT-Q and RBQ2A did not show significance. I ran regression tests with the independent variables separately from each other, and the coefficient data showed significance for both the CAT-Q and the RBQ2A. The results of the multiple regression analysis indicated that there is a relationship between expressions of neurodivergent behaviors and experiences of social isolation and loneliness. Therefore, I can reject the null hypothesis. However, I would prefer to gather more data before fully analyzing which expression of behavior has a more significant association with the experiences of social isolation and loneliness. There's limitations to the study. The small sample size is a significant limitation, largely due to the short time frame that was available for data collection. My own experience is another limitation. I have limited experience conducting research and analyzing data independently. If there's a larger amount of time to conduct the study, I would be more confident in the data collected, and I would feel more comfortable interpreting the results. Some suggestions are, if the study is to be replicated or run again, there should be an extended time frame to gather more data before it needs to be analyzed. It'd also be beneficial to ensure the study is spread to a larger amount of participants, rather than hoping people will read their U-Ball emails or share the link with people that they know. Here's my references. And thank you so much.
In the chat, does anybody in the room have a question for Megan? For Naomi?
I actually have a question. Hi. Super shocked to see that Hikikomori showed up, which is not something I would ever have expected. I was just curious, could you, I mean, I think interpreting that behavior as neurodivergent, or like people who have that as being more likely to be neurodivergent, is interesting. Could you say like a little more about where you found research about that or whatnot? I was walking in and out, so I kind of missed a little bit.
So I found research on that actually from looking at the U-Vault library online, but it was a study in Japan, and I guess because it's such a huge thing in Japan, it's talked about a lot. There is also exists in other Southeastern Asian countries. South Korea has talked about it more often lately, but it's super huge in Japan. I guess they wanted to know the characteristics of it and why people were socially isolating themselves to that significant of a degree. And they just compared it to symptoms of autism, which is also interesting to me because in certain areas, autism is not really talked about as much. Usually it's more talked about in Western countries, but they associated these symptoms of hikikomori with symptoms of autism spectrum disorder, and when they did case studies on it, they found that they were more likely to have those symptoms. especially with the social communication and social interaction deficits.
Thanks. That's super interesting. Some students in the room will know that I know a little bit about Japan, so I was really shocked to see that there, and that cultural difference is why I was curious. Thanks so much. You clearly did. Round of applause.
Thank you.